by offering a framework for understanding the trajectory of human rights in Egypt. First, the level of repression under President Sisi surpasses that of Mubarak, and even I would argue Gamal Abdel Nasser, in terms of the numbers of Egyptians killed, wounded, and detained. As autocratic as Mubarak was, he never attempted to eradicate the opposition. In contrast, repression under Sisi has been both more ambitious and totalizing, culminating in the worst mass killing in modern Egyptian history, according to Human Rights Watch. In a throwback to an older era, there have been regular reports of neighbors, colleagues, and even relatives informing on each other. Pro-regime figures have encouraged this. As former Minister of Information Osama Haikal said on national TV last year, quote unquote, "The enemy can be our own neighbor. The enemy is in our own homes." Also, something which doesn't get as much attention is that senior clerics under the Sisi regime, including state appointees, have routinely used religious rhetoric to incite violence against political opponents. The Grand Mufti at the time of the coup, Ali Goma, has employed essentially takfirist reasoning to argue that Brotherhood members are heretics and therefore their blood is licit. And I detail other examples of this rhetoric in my written testimony. He says, for example, in one military promotional video, "Blessed are those who kill them," referring here to Brotherhood members. And then there is the phenomenon of the disappeared, where security forces abduct Egyptian citizens outside and beyond the law. Human rights activists put the number of the disappeared at as high as 800. In other words, this is not your run-of-the-mill authoritarianism. There's actually no other major Arab recipient of U.S. foreign aid that actively disappears its own citizens. Now, Sisi was no Democrat, and he didn't claim to be, but he said he would bring stability. Many in the international community have echoed this narrative, that as bad as Sisi might be, at least Egypt is stable. This narrative, though, does not quite hold up to scrutiny. By any measurable standard, Egypt is now more vulnerable to violence and insurgency. The numbers are clear. In the 2 years prior to the July 2013 coup, there were a mere 78 attacks by militants, an average of 3.4 attacks per month. In the 2 years after the coup, there were 1,223 attacks, an average of 53 attacks per month, so a massive increase. This is where we are now. An ISIS affiliate has a foothold in the Sinai. Bombings are a regular occurrence in the mainland. The fact is that Sisi's heavy-handed approach to counterterrorism is fueling the very insurgency he claims to be fighting. This unfortunately appears to be the regime's approach to conflict resolution: more state power, more control, and more repression. Fortunately, there is more the U.S. can do. Yes, we have to be realistic. We have to work with Sisi on shared security interests. There's no way to get around that. But there is simply no reason to either legitimize or normalize Sisi's behavior by warming to him or acting as if he's just another Arab leader. Over the past year, the Obama administration has tried just that, for example, by relaunching the U.S.-Egypt strategic dialogue, yet Sisi has not reciprocated. Repression has only gotten worse. And as you know, in March, the Obama administration resumed delivery of key weapon systems. This, I would argue, was problematic, but two of the other changes are positive, at least in theory. Ending cash flow financing and channeling military assistance to 4 specific categories. This is where Congress can play an important oversight role, requiring the administration to consult and explain how this restructuring is being implemented. In my written testimony, I lay out the broader case that the U.S. enjoys more leverage than is commonly assumed. Part of the problem is that we haven't seriously attempted to use our leverage, and leverage, when unused, atrophies. The partial aid suspension of October 2013 was a suspension in name only. As the Project on Middle East Democracy's annual budget report details, Egypt still received $1.8 billion in assistance during the 8-month suspension period. In other words, we only suspended 8% of military assistance during this period, 8%. So it's not a question of if we can do it, but rather whether we want to do it. The US can, in fact, hold up weapons deliveries for significant periods of time. Let us also remember that Egyptian jets and tanks cannot be serviced without US maintenance and spare parts. It is not unreasonable, in my view, for the US to hold back on servicing Apaches, for example, unless US officials can actually see how they're being used on the battlefield. In closing, I realize that Egypt isn't a top priority today in Washington, but it should be. If there's a lesson that I've learned in studying the Middle East, it's that certain key events can have devastating long-term effects. If it's bad, it can get worse. So instead of waiting for Egypt to further destabilize, it is time to be proactive and fundamentally rethink our policy toward Egypt. Thank you.